Not only is history written by the victors, it's altered by the academics. Welcome, Mere Mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. I am your host here, Kyron, live on the 13th of August, 2025. And as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I opine about the chronicles of the past and literature. Okay, no, I don't do that. I don't even really know what that means. And that's actually a kind of common theme that we'll find today in this book here, The Lessons of History by Will and Ariel Durant. So this book was published in 1968, 102 pages in length, and probably took me 3 to 4 hours of reading to get through. It's a rather small book. Really doesn't take that much time. And it attempts to sum up the history of humanity across several categories of, I guess, what you'd call human activity. So they really delve into like a lot of examples from the past in terms of things from like the ancient times of Rome, civilizations, things like this. But they also add in their own, I guess, personal opinions throughout the book. There's 13 chapters and they are focused on things like biology, I can read them out to you here, history in the earth, biology and history, race and history, character and history, morals and history, religion and history, economics and history, socialism and history, government and history, history and war. Okay, is progress real? Okay, random sort of stuff. So it's probably, 5 pages each for each of those, roughly 5 to 10 pages. So that's the kind of sum up. Let's jump into the actual themes and questions that you'll find with this book. What is there to be learned from history? And if this book is anything to go by, essentially nothing. I'm going to be frank up front here that this book review is not going to go for a long time, partly because the book is short in itself, but also because I just really did not get anything from this. As I was going through it, I'm just like, okay, you're listing some things off, and there's certainly plenty of examples of history in here. But in terms of lessons from this, I was really kind of grasping and going like, what can I take from this? So, going over all of these chapters, they do reference a lot of historical facts, socialism related to the Incas, for example, a religion in Babylonia, biological birth control in Rome. So we can see how they're linking to these chapters and themes that they had kind of found as a commonality. And I didn't actually have any problem with the way they split the book up into these chapters. It reminded me very much of the kind of Dewey Decimal system that you'll find within libraries, which is the ranking of books into the kind of portions or categories of human thought, activity, and things like this. There's some minor differences, but the religion, socialism, governments, these are very broad topics, biology, race, all of this sort of stuff. They're broad topics which I think are worth looking at as a kind of historical perspective. But the summaries, I did not find any learnings or lessons from what they took. Sometimes a condensation of much data, of swathes of examples and things like this, knowledge patterns across that history and data can be very, very useful. But this book was not that. Instead, it felt more like the authors were opining, as I said, or having a haphazard attempt at adding their own opinions into what should be perhaps a bit more dry and historical. And instead of focusing on the knowledge, it was focusing on these more difficult to answer questions, themes that were, I guess, more qualitative than quantitative. And so what did they do wrong in particular? Why didn't I really get anything from this? Well, it focused almost exclusively on Western, with a little bit of European and I guess Western history in general. So they talked a lot about, the ancient Greeks, of the Roman civilizations, of the United States of America, of Britain, but very, very little about Asia, Africa, Latin America, or the Middle East. It was extremely skewed towards the, I guess, what you'd call a Caucasian perspective, if you want to put it like that. And so, even though they did reference some, there was not much at all. I'm really struggling to recall any times that they mentioned Africa, and if they did, not much. So that ratio, I think, didn't help in terms of, we're talking about the lessons of history. Well, it probably should be titled the lessons of Western history if you're going to focus more on that. And then the other aspects were just some random things. It feels like a very outdated book. Like I mentioned, it was 1968, so it's 50 something years old, but we're talking about history. We're talking about thousands of years here, so 50 years here or there shouldn't make a difference. I feel like we've found out most about, the ancient texts in terms of things. Like, sure, there's new discoveries, but not that much. Everything that is to be known about the past has probably already been kind of dredged up, and now we're just using more interesting ways of using technology to perhaps look at sediment layers underneath the surface, which they wouldn't have been able to do in the 1960s. But very much it just felt like a perspective of someone from that time as well. So they had this section on race where they were giving, I guess, credence or the point of view of, I guess, what you'd call eugenicists or racist or supremacists of some sort, and talking about, this is perhaps how this is how the Aryans thought under Hitler, and this is what were some of the thoughts of other period of civilizations and things like this. And whilst they weren't agreeing with it, they certainly didn't push back on it as perhaps hard as you might think nowadays. And yeah, perhaps just not being outspoken enough. So it was kind of weird reading that section and being like, why are you telling me this? This is just random. I really couldn't understand what they were doing. And, for example, they're talking about how there's 2 billion colored people and 800 million whites. And that just shows, the population of Earth is doubled, tripled since then. So, it felt outdated. And finally, the one image that they have in this book, so the whole book is text apart from this one thing, which is on page number 33. And you'll see it on your screen here, and I'm holding it up to the camera, the same thing, which talks about the table of character elements. So this is character. This is human character across history. And they've broken it up into instincts, habits, and feelings, and then a positive or negative of each of those. And then there's action or sleep, fight or flight, acquisition or avoidance, association or privacy, mating or refusal, parental care or filial dependence. And I have never seen anything like this before. I have no idea where they got this from. We might describe human nature through the table of character elements given on the following page. I just don't know where they got this from. What in particular made these sorts of things? And it's essentially just a word salad. What are the habits? Play, work, curiosity, manipulation. What are the negative? Rest, sloth, indifference, hesitation, dreaming, imitation, disorder. There is nothing to take from this. Absolutely nothing to take from this. Just bizarre and unhelpful is how I would describe that, which I feel describes this book in general. So jumping on to the authors, some extra details. The Durants, Will and Ariel, were born in the 1800s. She obviously took his last name and died in 1981. So actually, how does that make sense? Because wasn't this book 1968. Yeah, so that does make sense, not 1986. He was 13 years older than her, and he married her when she was 15. So he was 28, and he was her high school teacher at the time, and quit that so that he could, marry her. So obviously they are a bit out of the box, a bit unusual, willing to break trends or break societal norms, things like this. She also changed her first name to a Shakespeare character because I believe she was of Eastern European descent, or at least her name very much seemed like that, her original name. They both gained recognition for, I guess, their story of civilization. So they were historians. I think it was probably more Will, and she was helping him out with this, but it's kind of hard to tell. And Will's other book, which was called The Story of Philosophy, or he had many books, but this was the most prominent, was his most other notable, and he received criticism for really only focusing on the Western philosophy and not including much of Asian. And that is basically what I got from this book as well. So probably a common theme that he has done in these books, focusing more exclusively on Western sort of stuff. Totally fine, but you should probably write that and say the histories or the lessons of Western history, or the story of Western philosophy, something like that. So in terms of the actual book itself, the style was fine. It's not exactly rigorous, but I don't think you can be in a book like this because you're talking about human history. So I think what they did, which was mixing in quotes, observations, examples, I thought that was fine. Not really arguing for a point, more bringing up the general themes. I thought that was relatively good as well. The thing that got me most, and what I referenced in the title here of historians attempting poetry, was that they were trying to be poetical, particularly in their sum up sections of a chapter. So typically they would have 4 to 5 pages with the examples, referencing, people from history. I'm just reading here: Morse, Edison, Ford, Wright, Marx, Lenin, Mao Zedong. That's totally fine. But in the last kind of paragraphs, they would go a little bit off topic and wax poetical. So here's the ending of the chapter Growth and Decay, and the last paragraph. Civilizations are the generations of the racial soul. As life overrides death with reproduction, so an aging culture hands its patrimony down to its heirs across the years and the seas. Even as these lines are being written, commerce and print, wires and waves, and invisible mercuries of the air are binding nations and civilizations together, preserving for all what each has given to the heritage of mankind. What are you meant to take? Is that a lesson from history? I don't know. That just kind of sounds like them trying to wax poetical and sound fancy or something like that. So the problem I would say with this is that they're academics, and I personally didn't think that poetry was very good, and it felt to me like it stuck out like a sore thumb, that they were trying to include things instead of being like, here's some lessons from history of how wars get started or something interesting about war. They would then start talking about the muse and stuff like that. So yeah, a lot of things like that was my impression of this book. So going to the summary, similar book recommendations, I found this a rather average book. In fact, I found it below average. Thankfully, it was small and quick to finish off, so I just finished it, but I really can't say I took a single thing from this. There's nothing from this where I'm like, that's an interesting lesson of history. It's just they listed a bunch of randomish themes, including a bunch of observations of historical facts, I guess you'd call them, but there was no lessons to be taken from this. So look, it's a hard task to summarize history in general, so I'd give a little bit of leeway for that. The unfortunate bit is that they just did it really, really poorly. So overall, this is eminently forgettable. I can't recommend, and I'm giving it a 1.5 out of 10. The Lessons of History by Will and Ariel Durant. I wouldn't really bother with this book, which is rather funny because why did I read this in the first place? There was a Lynn Alden recommendation who she's kind of like a podcaster, I guess, if you call her, a podcast guest, who I find rather sensible, smart person who seems to have a pretty good historical perspective on just general topics. And she recommended this book. So I was like, oh, it's probably pretty good. So that wasn't what I found, and has made me call into question any other book recommendations that she has had. Or if so, I should focus more on the financial stuff because that is what she is more involved in, being a financial person. So no other books really come to mind in terms of summing up lessons of history or history. To be honest, you're probably better off just picking a niche and diving into that, much like I did recently with Lord of the Seas, with the Athenian Navy and that kind of historical perspective. That's probably what I would recommend if I was going to read some more history books, which I will do. And I'm probably not going to be looking for a book that'll try and sum up history in general, because it's a pretty hard topic or pretty hard task to attempt, and judging by this book, it didn't do it very well. So that's it for today. Short one. Thank you very much for joining in. This is a Value for Value podcast. I do all of this free upfront, no ads, no sponsorships, no outside influences in terms of what I am reading, other than the general life recommendations and things that are piquing my interest. And so with all of that being said, I just ask that you return some value in return. You can do this in many different ways. If you're watching this or listening to this, liking, sharing, subscribing, telling a friend about the Mere Mortals book reviews, word of mouth is very, very helpful and useful. I would love to get feedback. What do you think of these? How would you improve these book reviews? Is there anything you'd like to know more about the books that I'm reading in terms of, does the publisher matter to you? Does the feel of the book matter to you? Let me know these things. I would also really, really love to know your book recommendations. What are some of the things you're reading? What have you enjoyed in the past? What's your favorite book of all time? Or specific recommendations based on books that I have rated and reviewed and you think that I would enjoy. Very, very helpful. And then finally, there is the monetary side of things. So you can help support the podcast by using the PayPal link down below. You could also send in a boostergram, stream some sats. I have seen some people doing that on a modern podcasting app. If you go to meremortalspodcast.com/support, there is an explanation on that site, that page, which will give you all the details that you could use. An app like Fountain is a great place to start. So what is coming up? And just a reminder, I am live here, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday. Come join me if you ever are so inclined. What's coming up? I am reading a book called From Third World to First by Lee Kuan Yew, the ex-Prime Minister of Singapore. I have just finished Chip War, which is all about the semiconductor industry and kind of the history of how that got created and where we're at right now. I have got a couple other Asian books. I just started one called Bad Science by Ben Goldacre, and one has also, I think, got a book review coming up in the next episode. Not a live one, just a pre-recorded one. So plenty of stuff coming out, and I really do hope you enjoy them, and I really do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in history. Ciao for now. Kyron out.